In my last video, I cautioned you against the belief that poetry must be uplifting, or in the ordinary sense of the word, beautiful. And to illustrate the principle that great poetry can be haunting or heartbreaking, I read Wilfred Owen's harrowing World War I poem, Dulce et decorum est. Wilfred said of his own purpose for writing poetry, quote, "My subject is war and the pity of war. The poetry is in the pity," unquote. As a young man fighting on the front line, Owen had experienced the horrors of war, and through his poetry, he wanted us not just to know about them, but to feel them. Here we can make a connection to the first principle I talked about in video 1 with the example of Tennyson's The Eagle. That's the idea that the language of literature communicates not just information, but an essentialized, evocative, emotional experience. That's how Owen conveys the pity of war with his poetry. In the words of an article by the British Library, where incidentally the poem's manuscript is held, Owen, quote, evokes moments of extreme sense experience on the battlefield through an eerie combination of sound, effect, and violent imagining, unquote. This point is expanded upon in the next section of Sound and Sense, where they say that ordinary language is intellectual, but poetry, on the other hand, which is language used to communicate experience, involves not only your intelligence, but also your senses, your emotions, and your imagination. Today's poem will further illustrate that point. Perhaps you've heard about the Birmingham church bombing of 1963. One Sunday morning, Klan members detonated a bomb in the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, a church with a dominantly black congregation that had served as a meeting place for civil rights leaders. 14 people were injured and 4 young girls were killed. You may have heard about it, but have you felt it? Has it been made real to you the way Wilfred Owen made real the horror of war? It was to me by a poem I discovered in this chapter of Sound and Sense called Ballad of Birmingham. Ballad of Birmingham by Dudley Randall. Mother dear, may I go downtown instead of out to play, and march the streets of Birmingham in a freedom march today? No, baby, no, you may not go, for the dogs are fierce and wild, and clubs and hoses, guns and jails aren't good for a little child. But mother, I won't be alone. Other children will go with me, and march the streets of Birmingham to make our country free. No, baby, no, you may not go, for I fear those guns will fire. But you may go to church instead, and sing in the children's choir. She has combed and brushed her night-dark hair, and bathed, rose petal sweet, and drawn white gloves on her small brown hands, and white shoes on her feet. The mother smiled to know her child was in the sacred place. But that smile was the last smile to come upon her face. For when she heard the explosion, her eyes grew wet and wild. She raced through the streets of Birmingham, calling for her child. She clawed through bits of glass and brick, then lifted out a shoe. Oh, here's the shoe my baby wore. But baby, where are you? Where an article or a Wikipedia entry about this atrocity might allow it to remain abstract, there's something about this poem that makes it real. We could spend a long time analyzing what that is, but here's just a few ideas about how the author uses language to make us feel its horror. There's the juxtaposition of images of brutality and of innocence. Clubs, hoses, guns, jails, and a child. There's the intense focus on the bitter irony that this child was forbidden to go to a march where there was danger and was sent instead to church, a sanctuary of peace and goodness, and that is where she was killed. There are the images that give flesh and perceptible life to this innocent child. The combing of her night dark hair, the rose petal scent of her freshly bathed skin, and those little white gloves and shoes. There's the jarring transition from the mother's serene smile to the sound of the explosion and the knowledge that she would never smile again. And then there's the discovery and the wreckage of that little shoe, that sacred relic of childhood that now remained only as a reminder of the horror of a murdered child. Intellectual historian Alan Kors once said, quote, "Reading literature is indispensable to understanding atrocities because it transforms abstractions and statistics into a shared human experience and a shared comprehension," unquote. The feelings they arouse can't, of course, substitute for understanding. But ideally, to bring back phrases from earlier in this book, this shared experience and shared comprehension can help us to see and feel the significance of life and reaffirm our humanity.